All right. Victoria, I'm so excited to welcome you to HerCsuite Radio today. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I had the great pleasure of meeting you and then having you speak for our DEI Cross-Organization Council. That is a mouthful. Recently, and I learned a lot about you. But for our listeners who may not know all the things that I know now, can you share a little bit about the arc of your career and what is bringing us to you where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting you use the word arc. For me, there have been moments of pivots in my career. So I'll tell you, the plan was to be a lawyer. I thought from age 11 that that's what I was going to do, but I followed my passion, which is a big part of the advice I give to people I coach and anyone who will listen, and certainly my children as well. I love the business world. While I was in university, I worked in a bank in operations and contact centers and got promoted into leadership quite quickly. And so I made a decision to take a year off before what I thought was going to be to go to law school to focus on that when they had promoted me and relocated me, the bank that I was working for. And I ended up staying for almost 6 years, got recruited out of there. I was 24 years old in a massive stretch role for me as chief operating officer for an outsourcing company, because I had banking experience, because I had contact center experience, and because I think I've always exuded confidence, even if I didn't always feel like it. And then from there onwards, I've stayed in predominantly B2B professional services at a C-suite or equivalent level, and then have also done a number of other things. I jokingly say I'm a multi-potentialite, lots of interests and passions. So I'm an avid author, writer, and public speaker. I share not only what I've learned in business, but also a lot of my own personal story to help others. And mom, wife, fitness fanatic, foodie, wine lover. There you go.
So many things. And one of the things that I loved about your story when you were 24 that was transformative was that you were kind of the first to blaze a trail in that role. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think our listeners would find it really empowering to know that you advocated and were at the table when not many people were in that position at that age, especially.
Yeah. I started working at a very, very young age. I was 11, and even by 14, I was like the assistant manager at the shoe store I worked at. But I was the only, for sure, at the table. I was the youngest by at least 2 decades. I was the only woman, only member of the LGBT community. I was fairly out. I was married to a woman prior to now being married to my husband. And so I very much felt like I was the only. And I also, bore a lot of the imposter syndrome we talk about today because of a few things. Certainly being the youngest was one of those. And I was like, do I really, belong here because I've got less experience in number of years than others, but also because I stepped into that role. It was a COO and general manager of a business in which basically all functions of the business except for finance reported to me. And I had deep experience in operations, but I hadn't led technology teams at that point, utilized it and provided feedback to that function. I hadn't led HR directly, although I was leading large teams and involved in our talent and workforce strategies. I hadn't led a sales team more formally. So what I needed to do as a first in that was learn how to do a number of things. One, find and rely upon a team who brought the requisite skills and experience I didn't, and be humble enough to put my hand up and say, I don't know what I don't know, and trust in my team. And I also had to lean into the discomfort and recognize that I did still bring a lot to the table, and figure out how I could leverage the experience I'd had in a very new and different setting.
I think so many people are hesitant to raise their hand in different circumstances, whether it's when you're in a role, and I applaud you for saying what you didn't know. I think a lot of us might be like, well, I'm going to, the fake it till you make it kind of thing, but that doesn't always work out as well as you hope. Sometimes people do see that you don't know, and it's better to admit, that you don't know than to keep going. And I recently heard a story about CEOs like firing off questions and not being ready. And now you're in this amazing leadership position, which you have had a lot of leadership positions since then. What do you say to people that are in that situation where you don't know, and there might be like you might be presenting to the board or the C-suite, and they're like, well, what about this? And you're kind of like, sometimes it can take you aback. What are some strategies that you use there when that happens?
Well, I agree with you. This whole fake it till you make it doesn't work. The only time I would advocate that is around demonstrating confidence, right? It might be incredibly insecure and internally, but trying to show up with a great deal of confidence, I think, is always important. So, that has helped me dramatically in my career. And so when I do sit in front of, the C-suite clients I serve, or boards, or anyone, quite honestly, I want to come across with a degree of confidence, but in part because I've learned the things I speak on are the things that I have knowledge around. If I don't, that's when you'll find me quite quiet, or then saying, I don't know what I don't know. One of the things that I am known for from a strong personal brand perspective is being incredibly transparent and being authentic. And over the last number of years, learning to be more vulnerable as well. That in itself breeds trust. And so I think the fact that I stand in front of, other executives, whether it's a CEO or a board, and that I can put up my hand and say, I don't know, but I have either these people, that I do know who have that information, or they have enough trust in me as a leader. They know I'm also, very big on honoring my commitments. And so when I state something, and so when I say to them, I don't know, but I'm going to come back to you by X date with people or with information to provide that, they absolutely know that I'm going to deliver.
And, part of that authenticity that you were talking about earlier and sharing your story, I think with one positive thing that's happened in the last 3 years is that people are bringing more of their whole self to work, as opposed to, having everything be separated. So you've got your work life over here, and you've got, all the things that are happening over here. And then what does that look like? And we were just talking before we started this interview about a piece that you wrote that I saw first on LinkedIn, and I read it on your blog, about resilience and what does that mean, and being able to share that. I think a lot of times people hide behind the scenes and don't want to say all the things that they're really going through. But when you do share, then it helps other people feel comfortable in being able to say what's going on with them too. What does that mean for you, resilience, and maybe share a little bit about that story that you wrote about?
Yeah. So resilience for me it's like a muscle. And I do think you need to practice it to develop a healthy level of resilience. And I use that word intentionally because I think in my early years, given adversity I had in my youth, I probably didn't have a very healthy way of handling it. My best friend has nicknamed me Turtle, tough exterior, but all soft and mushy inside. And that turtle exterior means I can shoulder, I can handle a lot, but, without handling it well, being resilient, leaning into the emotions and feeling them and processing them to move forward, I think becomes unhealthy. Compartmentalizing works well temporarily, but you're going to need to open up that closet at some point and deal with what's in there. And so for me, my multi-step to being resilient in a very healthy manner is giving myself permission to feel the emotion when an obstacle, a challenge, some kind of adversity comes my way, but then standing up from that emotion, ideally with people who support me, supportive tribe around myself, but then anchoring on whatever the goal or objective that I, had before me, is or was. And then modeling the thoughts, the action, the behavior, and taking the action to move towards that, but also giving myself permission to fail, even on that journey, and then step back up and go back forward. So that's what being resilient and some of the steps I personally take are. And yeah, I think that there's the world is created, this amazing filter, literally and figuratively, on, Instagram and all other social platforms to just show how wonderful life is. And I wrote that piece because I think a lot of people think that about me. And I want to say I have a lot of amazing things, in my life, whether that be, my husband and my children, the fact that although we've had health issues, we do all generally have our health that we're working towards. We have an amazing group of friends that have become our chosen family. So lots of greatness, but 2022 was incredibly difficult. From, my youngest suffers from, mental health challenge quite severely, bipolar disorder. And it was a bit of a roller coaster in 2022 to my husband's back surgery. My father-in-law passed away unexpectedly. I had a very serious accident in the summer and I've had a couple of surgeries since that. And this long road of, physical therapy and recovery. Some goals and objectives I have from a professional career standpoint that haven't quite been met that I need to work towards. So I shared that because I want people to know that what they see, I've won a number of awards and gotten accolades, and they see that I do all these speaking engagements and they just think how wonderful, successful, and life has to be rosy. I wanted them to know that yes, those are amazing things that have happened, but there's a lot of trauma that's occurred as well. And in that piece, I gave some of the elements of advice in terms of, leaning into the emotion and how to, pick ourselves up and move forward.
So powerful. And I will have the link in the show notes. I want our listeners to find it, read it, and be inspired by it. And one of the things you said just now about allowing yourself to feel, but then you have to move on. I know in my previous role, I was business development. So I sold big multi-million-dollar projects. And if I lost one, which there's plenty, when you're in sales, there's a lot of fails before you get to the big, there's like a roller coaster. And I would allow myself to have like maybe a day or 24 hours. I would have this like period where I would just be like, it's fine. I'm going to feel the feeling of defeat, right? Like that terrible letdown. And then it's like, all right, I'm going to bounce back up and it's time to like go for it. And like you, I work out and I do all the things like some get the endorphins going to make that happen. But I do think if you don't let yourself have that moment of, open the box, as my oldest daughter, I was telling you about, open the box and let you feel, and then close the box. It's okay to close the box back, but you have to make those things happen. In your work that you're doing, one of the things that I think is really inspirational, and I've heard you talk about it both with our council and then also in other programs, is about how you lead your team and you allow them to focus on projects rather than on schedules. And I think that is an incredibly intuitive and appreciating all the things that are happening for people. And it does kind of go in with what we're talking about with being resilient in your life. How did you come up with that? And I'm sure your team really embraces that. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for them and that idea?
Yeah, my phrase is that there are no schedules, there are just deliverables.
Which I love.
And it came about many, many years ago. And so very much long before pandemic, where there was more of a focus on creating more flexible environments. And that's a demand by, today's workforce now, is creating that flexibility for people, recognizing that it's all just life, right? I hate when I get asked the question, how do I balance it all? And I'm like, there's no separation for me. It's all life. And I figure out a way to fit it in. And so for me, that concept came about because, I became a young mother by choice. My first child was born just a few months before I took that COO role at 24, quite frankly. So
wow.
I was a young mother in a new executive role that was exceptionally demanding, almost expectations for 24/7. It was outsourcing with some of our operations offshore, right? So I've been connected to a pager before it became the BlackBerry that was actually blue, and from there. And so I've been connected all these years. But part of how I was able to get it done was like, I knew clearly what my commitments were. And if I'd made a timeline, to commit to a client or otherwise to deliver against it, but that I had to fit everything in. And so I created flexibility in my own schedule. It was really important for me as my children were, a little bit older, maybe school age, but to make leave the office when I was going into one, by 5 or 6 o'clock or whatever it was, get home and have dinner with them. Once they got to bed, I was back online. And so that was the that's how I got it all done. And so I wanted to create that flexibility for my team. So that phrase came about as people were asking me to take aged parents to doctor's appointments or their children to soccer games or whatever. And so I just said, look, we've got commitments to one another. So I don't care when you get it done. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Obviously, I'm in a B2B environment and clients will put, time on our calendar at certain times. And we can't always be flexible in that regards, but many of the times we can. So I've tried to create that. And I think that's built a very strong, what I'll say, followership with my team for a number of other reasons, but creating that flexibility also demonstrates that I trust my team, which I think is critically important.
It is so important. And among the roles that you do, in addition to leading teams and being an executive, is you're also an executive sponsor for an ERG. And I'm wondering how that translates to the ERG in terms of a volunteer, because a lot of ERGs have volunteers and that is on their flex time, right? How does that work with ERGs in your organization? And then also, how does that help people that are serving in that role?
So number of things that I'd say, Natalie, related to that. So first of all, it's about getting people involved with the things that they're incredibly passionate about, that they feel connected from a purpose and impact perspective. One of the other sayings I have is where there's conviction, there's capacity. And so again, if we have conviction and we're aligned to the vision, mission, purpose, values of the ERG itself, it makes it very easy to give, so I say very easy, I'll use air quotes for that. It makes it easier, because you've got conviction to create some capacity to do that work. So that would be one. Two is though, for those who are looking to create and enhance or develop the ERGs or BRGs within their workforces, do make sure that you have a multitude of volunteers. For that very reason, is we are often doing it off the side of our desks as the plus one to our day job. So that would be another. And the third is, I think it's exceptionally important for business leaders and HR professionals when looking at building performance plans to ensure that an element of that is actually built in to the plan itself. If we want to build a more inclusive culture where people feel like they belong, they're, more engaged, therefore performing at higher levels, then that a big part of that is the time we invest in investing in other people in the business. So we need to make that an element that we measure around what are we doing to give back to our community? What are we doing to create a more inclusive culture or environment? So that should absolutely be a measure of performance beyond the widgets or productivity metrics that need to be produced each year.
And kind of listening to what you're saying about that talent and having it be part of how you're reviewing and encouraging people to take an active role. I think when they're active, they're more committed. If we know one thing also about the last few years, there's been this roller coaster of people feeling disengaged because they're not committed, like you were talking about earlier. And you spoke for us on DEI, and I'm wondering how that all intertwines, because the thing that doesn't work is when it's siloed away from other parts of the business, but integrating it in with the ERGs and across the culture and across the company. What are you seeing that's working really well to do that?
It needs to be interwoven throughout all parts of the organization. I think, many early organizations in their DE&I efforts, and maybe some that are just a little further behind in their thinking, have it sit with the function of HR. We have a chief diversity officer and we've got some policies around recruitment and, benefits for all, but that's where it stops. And the reality is it needs to be woven throughout the entire fabric of the organization. We all own our workforce diversity and inclusion and sense of belonging, period. As leaders, how we show up, who we hire, how we talk and act, within the workplace is all a part of that. But it's also, who do we choose as our vendors or suppliers? when we are offering products and services out to the marketplace and the communities we serve, are they equitable and available to all? Like, we need to be thinking about it much more broadly and not just purely as this one finite measure of the diverse employee population that we're able to measure, when it needs to be a multitude of other things and other metrics, and not just workforce related.
And looking forward to the future of work and to the future and continuing this inclusion, because, you know, there's a lot being said at the beginning of the year. People are saying we have to remain inclusive, to others feeling like it's getting abandoned because of fear of recession and all those things. What are you seeing for the future, optimistically, the possibilities? Because I know you have an unstoppable mentality. So what are you seeing that we can hang on to and be like, yes, this is going to be positive? I'm a half overflowing, half glass overflowing kind of person. For those who are listening, like, future, what can we look towards?
I don't see it coming off the strategic agenda, by the way. As you said, I mean, there's certainly what's coming up on the agenda is certainly cost reductions and gaining more efficiency and digital fluency and digital transformation to enable, the workforce and businesses to move forward. But the reality is this remains as one of the strategic imperatives for businesses, because if you look at now, even in terms of consumers purchasing and therefore employees and who they want to work for, they're much more purpose focused. And again, that alignment to, values and mission and impact that they want to have. And so it can't come off. But the reality is this doesn't actually have to cost a lot of money. So although there's a lot of focus on, cost reduction, creating a really healthy, positive workplace actually costs nothing. Generating a diverse slate of candidates for a potential job opening just means a recruiter needs to look potentially in different places, but again, doesn't cost more money. So what I'm seeing for all of the companies and clients that I'm supporting is that it remains on the strategic priority as part of the imperatives they have as their broader purpose and impact mission.
So glad you said it doesn't cost anything, because I think oftentimes people do associate progress with cost, or, how are we going to be able to afford something like this? Because there's always, instead looking at it like, well, we can't afford not to. And I've had actually one of our DEI council co-chairs who used to be at a very big pharma company. And she said that customers are they're looking at you to see how you are reflecting who they are. And so it is an imperative, and if that isn't a business case, I would say that should be the business case for people that are like, oh, I don't need it. It's like, well, no, you kind of do, because you're going to lose a bunch of customers if you don't do it, right? I mean, I think that's part of it. Exactly. So looking at this year and thinking about Unstoppable and what is on the agenda for you for an Unstoppable, what are you seeing for yourself this year?
So I'm not necessarily a fan of the New Year's resolution, but I am always a fan of planning and setting goals and objectives for myself, period. So for me, that's just an iterative process that I'm doing all year long. That said, I do have a couple on the agenda. One is I put on 10 pounds as a result of the accident. Those will be coming off for sure. I share that I did not have an accident, but I do know what you're saying. And I can't tell that from you, but I feel you on that. So that's one. I continue to look at from a career perspective, I will likely go back to being the C-suite executive versus sitting on the other side of the table, consulting with those. So I'll continue to network and figure out what that looks like, with no set date. So for any of my colleagues who might be listening, like, don't worry, but I think about that. And I do love the work that I do from a public speaking perspective. It gives me such joy and energy to share, whether it's my story, whether it's to talk much more around DE&I in the workplace and in our communities, whether it is talking about leadership and culture. That fills up my joy bucket. So I want to continue to do as much of that as I possibly can in balancing within my life. And I did get my younger child moved in with my older one, have them settled. So I wish greatness and calm and success for the two of them. To the extent that I can influence and control that, but that's certainly a desire I have for this year.
Well, it is so hard to end amazing conversations like this, Victoria. But for our listeners, if they want to know more about you, and you are in many places, but if you could share where they can go to find you, where should they go?
One-stop shop that will take you everywhere else you need to go is my personal website, which is victoria-pelletier.com.
Perfect. I will have that in the show notes as well as some of your other links. So no worries there. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk, and I look forward to seeing you in HerCsuite and at other DEI programs. And thank you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.